Good evening and welcome to Undoing I Do with Stephanie and Aday. I'm Stephanie Hunnell, the owner of the Hunnell Law Group in Asbury Park, New Jersey, and your co-host for this evening.
And I am Adela Cheryl Dow, the owner of the law offices of Adela Cheryl Dow in Staten Island, New York, and your co-host for this evening as well. Hey, Stephanie.
How
Long
are
time no
you?
time. I am great. How have you been?
Good. Living the dream, working on a couple prenups as we speak.
Yeah, I just had a nice consult with for a prenup a couple of days ago in a same-sex case, which is going to be so much fun. I love working with same-sex couples. I know you do as well.
I do.
So I am I am all for prenups. We all know that. So is Stephanie probably, even though I'm not going to talk for you. But there's a lot of people who are skittish, afraid, don't want to break up a good thing.
And I do have a different opinion on a couple of, aspects of prenups than you. I think that's what
Ooh,
we're going
let's
to
get
find out
into it.
today.
Let's get
So
into it.
I understand from our previous shows that you think everybody needs a prenup, like hands down. I think correct.
I do.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
really do. Hmm.
I'm not necessarily on team brand new relationship, brand new marriage. Get a prenup if you have nothing. If you're building your life together, brand new. I'm not necessarily thinking that it's necessary.
See, and I'm like, that you're gonna be on you're gonna be on this bus with the person. The bus may veer off, and I just want the safety belt. I just want the safety belt
Yep.
because people just change so much, and you could be married to this person like who's a complete hustler in the beginning of the marriage, and you guys are building together, and then they all of that changes, and it may not be what you bargained for. But what happens is that people love the person, and then they love them into the situation where they owe them all their money, and I'm just like, no, I can't. Mm-mm. Mm-mm. Can't do it.
Yeah. See, I'm thinking about the relationships where you literally have nothing, you come in with nothing, and then you're both working together as a team to try to build a life and a relationship and houses and cars and businesses or whatever you're doing together. And even if one person is maybe staying at home and contributing, less as far as the business aspect of it or the work aspect of it, they're doing something else because maybe you're starting a family.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
So
mm-hmm,
that should be
mm-hmm.
compensated for as well.
Yeah, I definitely think that those scenarios, I don't think that people should enter into prenups whereby no one gets anything, and whereby the stay-at-home parent, for instance, gets absolutely nothing. But when you think about, cases where, let's say that there was supposed to be that stay-at-home parent dynamic and the kids were supposed to be raised, and then the kids just never came, but the other person didn't get the memo that they still needed to be doing stuff, right? Or the kids did come, and then, mom, for instance, who was supposed to be staying at home is now not staying at home because something happened with the spouse, and that spouse no longer wants to do anything, no longer wants to work. And now the dream that everybody was building is a nightmare, and we need some parameters. But I'm going to tell you where I really think that it matters, and so I'm going to agree with you somewhat, but where I really think that it matters is with respect to people who are coming into first marriages and who have something. When you
Yes.
got stuff, you got property, you got money, you need a prenup. I don't care if it's just one condo or if it's a tricycle. You need a prenup because you don't want somebody to go walking away with your tricycle. If y'all have nothing, 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 maybe, but once you start having, even if you have degrees, I don't know what states, I don't know if there are any states left right now that value degrees. New York used to value degrees and distribute degrees as a part of their equitable distribution. They don't anymore. That state doesn't anymore. And I don't know if there are any states that do. But if there are, you need to have that. You need to have a prenup as well. Even if the only thing you have is your student loan and that degree.
Yep. I mean, I'm with you on that. If you have anything at all, I do think that you need a prenup. Even if you recommended a prenup for somebody who had the start of a business. They had already started to build this business. They maybe had it for a year, but it really amounted to nothing yet, but there was some potential there. So I thought, you definitely should get a prenup, because as you grow that business, you want to make sure it's protected and it's yours. That'd be the worst thing ever. You go into a marriage, the other person does nothing, but then gets a huge piece of, maybe not huge piece, because that's not realistic, but
Yeah, it's not,
gets a piece of the business, even though they contributed next to nothing.
right. And so, and then you have situations where people have inheritances, right? And even though the inheritance is probably going to be your separate property, there are instances where people start commingling the inheritance. And, people get sloppy, with day to day living, and not purposefully, but just because, life is lifing. And they don't remember to put, the $100,000 check that granny gave them into a separate account. They just, we'll move it at some point. And then that $100,000 has been there for 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years. And now there's an argument that, that you gifted your spouse $50,000 of that 100. This is where, dang it, I should have gotten that prenup is going to come into play, right? Because even if you were sloppy like that, most likely the prenup could have saved you, from
And
your sloppiness.
I agree with you. And I think you could have sort of a hybrid where you're still letting people accumulate things together as a marital, unit, but also you're protecting certain things. So you're protecting any gifts from family. Working on one where there's, just that issue. There's one family that really is adamant about protecting their family wealth, which is completely understandable. So we build a lot of that in there, but it doesn't necessarily mean that everything has to go in there. So
Right.
You'll be protected that way. I'm also think you should be protected if you have any retirement assets that you have accumulated prior to the marriage, whether they're IRA, 401k stock, anything like that, especially stocks, I think, because those things tend to be reinvested, and there's certain arguments that can be made if you're reinvesting and buying and selling. Did you buy them during the, you sold something and then rebought something during the marriage? I mean, there's just arguments to be made, and if you want to avoid additional litigation, have the prenup, because it's outlined, it's clear, Also, second marriages, I think, is very important to have a prenup, because usually you have some assets or baggage from your first marriage that you want to protect.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. I'm doing a prenup right now for a couple where one of the parties has been married before and has a child, and then the other party has never been married before, doesn't have a child. And I have been trying to negotiate this prenup for many months. And the reason why it has been negotiated and stalled is because the other side, the side that has never been married before and has no child or no children, doesn't want anything that accrues during the marriage to be considered marital. Even in the event of death, forgetting them getting divorced, right?
Yeah.
Even in the event of death, the person who I am representing would essentially get none of the partner's estate. Now, this is where I think we got problems, right? That's where you start to say to yourself, okay, and I could only think with the brain of a woman when I start to say to myself, okay, this person doesn't actually want to build anything with me. See, prenups and the way that they're written can really be a clue into who you're dealing with as well. It's one thing for somebody to want to, right? It's one thing for somebody to want to protect their assets. It's another thing when it seems like they want to protect their assets at any cost.
Right.
That's very, very different. And it's definitely going to polarize your soon-to-be spouse. If you move like that.
I just had a conversation with someone about income generated during the marriage, and one party wanting that income excluded so that you can put in savings and do whatever you want with your income, and it's not going to be included as an asset of the marriage. So I played, worst case scenario. What happens if it's on the other person's side? You're making $250,000 and you decide, I'm not going to contribute anything to the house. I'm just going to put all my money in savings. The other party's now paying all of the expenses, has no savings because they're only making, $100,000 a year. And then you come back and you're ready for divorce and you're like, this is my income. All of the savings was my income. And you said, all my income is my income. How is that fair? Plus, I get, the half of the house because we put it in joint names.
So this is the other thing. Okay, this is where this leads down. Because look, anybody who's listening to this, you can put just about anything that you want into a prenup, except for custody of children and really child specific type things that you cannot put into a prenup because the child's best interests are what's going to govern, right? And so even if you try to put stuff like that in about who's going to get custody, just realize that if a lawyer lets you do that and they don't tell you that this is probably something that ultimately may not be enforceable, run away from that lawyer, right? We have different runaway points for lawyers on the show. And that's one of them. But, one of my pet peeves is where people say, oh, I'm going to earn money during the marriage and then I'm going to buy a house. And just because the house is in my name, you're not going to get any of this asset. So now let's give the people a little bit of a backup, right? Generally, anything that you buy from the point that you say I do to the point that somebody files for divorce is considered to be marital property, or at least there's a presumption that the asset that you purchase or accumulate is marital property, right? And you can get over that presumption by having a prenup. And in a lot of prenups, you have people who say, well, I'm going to earn XYZ amount of money. I want all of that money to be mine. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go out to Omaha and I'm going to buy a farm. And then the farm is, is all mine. And then next thing you know, they struck oil in Omaha and now the oil is theirs, right? So and you have this one person getting uber wealthy and the other person getting nothing. Now, the good thing about it is that there's some public policy that will prevent you from having a situation where your spouse is just completely impoverished, right?
Right. Yeah, I mean, the court is not going to allow somebody to enforce an agreement where the other party would be destitute. But it's a really minimal standard. I mean, the person might have to be disabled and just having, getting disability income or something like that. I mean, if the person is making $40,000, $50,000, that's not a huge amount of money for, a household these days. And the other party can have their Omaha farm with oil rights, and the court might still enforce that prenup because at the time that the prenup was drafted, at least if your state follows the Uniform Prenuptial and Civil Union Act, I think it's called, then it has to be unconscionable at the time that it was drafted. Doesn't the starting or the overturning point isn't when you're trying to enforce it, but when it was drafted.
Right. And so this is one of the reasons why, and look, sometimes people will look at an agreement and they're like, oh, it's not really the best, but I'll still sign it. That kind of thing where it's not really the best, that's not unconscionable. Okay.
Right.
Because we're all free to make bad agreements. The court will let you make the most ridiculous agreement out there, so long as it's not unconscionable. And everybody will be saying, dang, you shouldn't have signed that. But that doesn't mean that, this agreement is really one that will have you losing your shirt, right? So, it really has to, when somebody says unconscionable, it means that it has to shock the conscience, okay? There's not a lot that shocks the conscience of most of us anymore.
That is true. I mean, there's also some standards. I mean, the court wants to know that you've had an exchange of financial information, right? So that you full disclosure, or if you didn't have a full disclosure, that you knowingly waived your right to that disclosure, that you had an attorney review it, or you had a knowing waiver of an attorney to review the document. Right. So there's some protections that are built in, but really you're right. There's not a lot that shocks the conscience. I could tell you, was last year. Well, yeah, we're in 2023 now, but so last year we had a prenup that was a court enforced, and it was a Rocket Lawyer prenup. It was terrible. It had blanks in it. It referred to law that was outside of the state of New Jersey. It had the wife who had no children being responsible for the husband's children, but even after the divorce, like things that just are not
What?
in a prenuptial agreement. References to community property issues,
Oh
and
my
then
gosh.
no choice of law I mean, there was a lot of things in it. There was a disclosure of financial information with no backups provided. It was signed on the eve of jumping on a plane to go to Vegas to get married. The judge still said, no, I think that's an enforceable agreement because at the time that it was prepared, both of the parties signed this square here that said we're knowingly and voluntarily waiving our right to counsel, and neither of them had counsel, and we're satisfied with the financials listed on exhibit A and B.
And nobody from Rocket Lawyer sue us, but so New Jersey and New York are not community property states. So
Exactly.
basically the law was completely wrong.
Yep. With references to statues from California.
Unbelievable. Now, did nobody? I mean, this is the thing. Whoever pulled it up, nobody saw that it said California. Were they too buzzed trying to get to Las Vegas? What was going on? You
They
know?
did find it at a pub, so I don't know.
Oh my gosh! But I'm gonna tell you, and I'm not a judge, and I don't play one on TV either. But I wouldn't have enforced that. I'm sorry, I would not have upheld that.
I wouldn't have either. And I'm not trying to be biased because I was the one trying to not have it enforceable,
Mm-hmm.
but I wouldn't have. At the minimum, I would have said, we're going to reserve on this, go to mediation and try to figure it out because
Mm-hmm. No,
I
that's the
see
line.
some
That's
problems.
that's the that's the that's the catchphrase of the day
Yeah.
anyway. Which a lot of judges now.
Oh, don't get me started on what's going on here.
Yeah. So, and to me, that when it's clearly demonstrating that nobody drafted anything even remotely in line with New York or New Jersey law in that
Mhm.
situation, that really should not have been upheld. Did anybody appeal?
We didn't. We ended up settling it. So it worked out okay. But
Okay.
um, it would have been. I mean, that was what was going to have to happen. Um, because there was no option. I was probably going to do an interlocutory appeal, which just means I was going to appeal prior to trial,
Mm-hmm.
to reverse the judge's order.
Yeah, and it costs a lot of money to do stuff like
Mhm,
that. You see,
mhm,
look, people want to get $2 solutions to $30,000 problems.
mhm.
And what's the phrase? What's the phrase? Play stupid games and end up with stupid prizes.
I haven't heard that one in a long time, but yes, I think
But
that's
that's
it.
what it is, right? That's what it
And
is.
if you need a prenup, by the way, you should also just take the time and get it done correctly. Go to an attorney, have it done correctly. Had even on the other side, if the husband really wanted this prenuptial agreement to be enforced, he had millions of dollars. He should have gone to a lawyer,
Really
had it drafted correctly, months in advance, not a couple of days beforehand. Frankly, I think that should have disqualified it
agreed.
on its own.
Agreed. Agreed.
But the
Mhm.
but the judge did say, I have to say this, so I'm not saying what judge or what county, but the judge said that she had the right, even though she had her dress, she could have returned it, and she had the right to cancel the trip.
I mean,
So
you
there was
have the
no
right to
coercion
do
getting
anything.
presented with it at the night before.
Come on, that I think that was a complete miscarriage of
Mhm,
justice. I think
mhm,
that was a complete abuse of a trial
mhm,
court's discretion.
mhm,
So let's explain this. Generally, I mean, and there's case law that says that if people don't have enough time to sign, to really consider an agreement, it's considered to be made under duress, and and then the rest is the pressure of, oh my gosh, I have 100 people that are invited to my wedding, and now I'm gonna have to cancel it, and what am I gonna do? And right, all
mhm,
of that angst that comes over somebody when they get a last minute um prenuptial agreement, and generally a couple of days before that prenuptial agreement would have been invalidated,
mhm.
because there's no more pressure that I could even imagine.
Yeah.
Right, aside from trigger warning, I'm gonna just say something. Aside from somebody putting a gun to your head, I don't really understand what other kind of pressure there could be. There's a lot of money on the line. and also your, depending upon your culture, I don't care what culture it is, actually, your reputation, the way people perceive what happened, right? We're not robots, we're human beings. And so, these are considerations that should be made. I think that was a huge abuse of discretion. And even though I'm glad that you settled, I really wonder how that would have turned out on an appeal.
Yeah. I mean, I really, that's the thing with appeal. So I really wanted to appeal. But of course we have a conversation that says, here's the cost of appeal. Here's the
Right.
numbers that we're talking about for settlement purposes. If we subtract those out, we're going to still end up here. But the appeal doesn't mean you win automatically. It just
Right.
means now we get to start back from scratch. So
That's
now
right.
we're starting over with a trial regarding the validity of the prenuptial agreement. So the cost associated with it was
Right.
more than just settling for a lesser amount than she wanted.
Yeah, and that's a smart point. Look, when we're doing these cases and we're representing people, the way that Stephanie and I practice, even though we practice in two different law firms, we have the same thought process with regard to how we represent clients. And we want to try to represent you in the most efficient way that costs you the least amount of money and gives you the least amount of exposure litigation wise. And that's the way that we draft our agreements too.
Mhm.
Look, you know, we want you to have a document that's not going to be something that could potentially end you up down the line in a set aside proceeding with somebody trying to overturn this prenuptial agreement.
Mhm.
So even though, we want to protect your interest in making sure that all your assets are separate, or in making sure that you have a proper amount of support in the event of a divorce, we also want to make sure that you're not going to be spending thousands upon thousands of dollars 10, 15, 20 years down the line when
Right.
something off with respect to litigation.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, just for this one example, the husband had spent, I think, around $45,000
Ooh,
for his side of the litigation. Had
ooh,
he, yeah, had he invested in a proper prenuptial agreement, when my client came to me and showed me the document, I would have said to her, no, you had an attorney. You both had an attorney. Here's your financials. Really, it's not worth your fight to try to overturn the prenuptial agreement, unless she
right.
was coming to me telling me she was actually coerced.
Mm-hmm. 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 Right. Yeah.
Because
Wow.
I
That
tell
was
people bad news. I mean, I'm not, that's what it is. I'm not going to tell you let's fight this if it's not worth that fight. You're
listen,
the same.
people who've been watching us for long enough know we kind of sort of really care about how we look. We don't want to look stupid.
Mhm.
So we're not going to be giving you good news just because you want to hear the good news. We're trying to we're trying to maintain our caliber as people who know what the heck we're talking about when we go and talk to judges. I was in front of a judge yesterday who I really, really like, and I was doing a case with respect to sexual access in a paternity case, and those trials are fun. So I was doing this, but it was her first time having this type of hearing, and she said to the attorneys involved, "Look, I've never done this before. I'm relying upon you all because you all know what you're doing. So just letting you know, I'm relying upon you with how this is supposed to run." I want to maintain my caliber as that attorney that a judge could be like, okay, you know what you're doing, so just guide me along.
Right.
You know?
That says a lot. I mean, that says a lot about you coming before the judge and knowing that she can count on you to be truthful, to present your case in such a way that she knows that she can trust what you're saying. That's huge. I know
So we want to
there's
maintain
some
that.
unfortunately that are not that way.
That's true. And you don't want to be the person who ends up in front of this judge who knows that they don't know what they're doing, but won't phone a friend. And here goes your prenup. Oh yeah. Oh, enforce the prenup that was written on the napkin 2 hours before the wedding.
Yeah.
Sure, sounds like they knew what they were doing to me. But if somebody's going to enter into a prenup, what do you think is the top thing that they need to provide for if they are in getting into a second marriage, which is where you think that everybody should have a prenup?
You mean what do you mean by provide for?
The one thing that you would make sure is in the prenup.
So I think I would want to make sure that all of the premarital assets are protected and all of the income generated from those assets, including any gains, or all remain separate property. So that way there could be no argument that the gain during the marriage was should be counted as marital income. I mean, marital
Mhm.
part of the marital estate.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. Anything that your children would have, that you would want your children to have, is
Hmm.
something that I would protect. So if
Yeah.
if you're getting remarried and you all are moving into the house that you had, even if it's a house that you had with your ex and you're moving in, I'm gonna want you to protect that, because
Mhm.
I want to make sure that if you pass, especially if you pass without a will, that's another episode that we need to have, right?
Mhm.
Get one of our estate planning buddies to get on here, because if you pass away without a will, none of this premarital and all this other stuff even matters.
Nope.
Okay, and your spouse will have something called a right of election, which we can talk about in another show if you all want us to. And what you thought your kids are gonna get, we're gonna get,
Mhm.
is not what they're gonna get,
Right.
and you're creating more problems for your children than is even necessary.
Yep.
So
Agreed.
yeah, I would definitely make sure that those types of things are completely protected.
On that
Whew.
topic on that topic also, I think once you get married, you should look at your accounts, like your 401ks, IRAs, all of that, to make sure all of your beneficiary designations are up to date, because you might have your ex still on certain things. I know there was a life insurance case a few years back where the ex of like 15, 20 years ago was still on a life insurance policy, and that policy was paid to the ex. You want to make sure that those things are updated. So if you want your kids to get that, the kids are going to get that. And then whatever portion you are leaving to your spouse, if anything, is accounted for.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%, because so those types of accounts, or those types of assets, life insurance, bank accounts with PODs, which is a pay on
Mhm.
death, on them. If you have a 401k and your ex is on your 401k, the whatever you have designated is what's going to be honored by not only the plan or the insurance company, but probably also by the court.
Mhm.
Yeah, so unless you have a provision, which in your agreement, which talks about that, you all are going to be in the situation where this money's going to go. And so you definitely want to change all of those designations. You want to make sure that you don't. One thing that people don't realize is that they should make sure that they don't have minor children as beneficiaries to
Yes.
any of these things, right? You know, that is a major problem, because most insurance entities will not pay out to minors.
Right. Exactly. And I think most entities, I mean, if you have a good broker or whoever you're going to, they'll usually make
Right.
sure that if you're naming a child, they'll make sure there's a trustee appointed, and they'll give you that paperwork. And you don't need an attorney to do that. They usually
Right.
have forms that you can complete, but definitely you should not name a minor.
Yeah, absolutely not. Absolutely not. Well, I hope that everybody goes out and gets the prenup. And if you're in Team Stephanie, then if you have any money and it's a second marriage, but look, if you all know that you're about to blow up, and this person, just think about it. If you are the person that had a second thought about whether you should marry this person, get you a prenup.
Yeah. Yes. If there's any second thoughts or hesitation, actually, I'm with you. I'm on team a day with that. Have a great week, everyone. See you next 2 Thursdays.
Good night. Thanks for watching. Make sure that you like, subscribe, and comment. Bye.
Bye.